Hi everyone, I'm Daniel, and today I want to talk to you about playing together with other players in a group. Whether it's a pickup group at a convention or your usual crew, it's important to make sure everyone feels welcome and is having fun. But sometimes it's easy to get tunnel vision and forget this, especially when you're focused on winning. And there's nothing wrong with wanting to win. So, I've come up with a list of 5 bad habits to watch out for in both preparing your deck for group play and while playing the game itself. Most of these bad habits are about making sure the group is having a good time, but I think in the long run, they'll help you have more fun with the game too. First up is main character syndrome. Arkham Horror the card game is a co-op game, and this means that the players are all here to complement each other's strengths and weaknesses. You're not playing together just so you can show off how great you are at this game, or some sick infinite combo you found on the internet. In fact, if you haven't already done so, give Carson Sinclair a try. The butler highlights how fun and powerful it can be to play selflessly. The biggest thing is to make sure everyone who came to play gets a chance to do what their deck or investigator wants to do. Someone wants to interrogate every enemy? Sounds cool. Someone else wants to fill up their flamethrower with as many bullets as possible? Great. This also goes to general team roles. If someone volunteered to be responsible for most of the clues, let them do it. If you think you can do it better because your deck is already crushing it, don't do it. Back off, don't leave someone with nothing to do. This is something that should be handled in a session 0 where everyone talks over the team composition and some basic deck ideas so no one's toes get stepped on. Deck building and piloting is a form of personal expression. Let everyone get to tell their story. Now, I don't mean that you shouldn't help out your teammates if they can't perform their role. As I said before, it's a co-op game, so everyone wins together or loses together. If someone can't find their weapon, maybe you can help out with some fight events in the meantime. What you have to be careful of is taking over, or looking like you're taking over their role so someone feels useless. On a side note, this is exactly why a lot of players are tired of Seekers and relatedly the bias towards clue getting in scenario design. It's not just that Seekers cards are very powerful, it's that they are more likely to see their cards because of their insane card draw. There's a great solution to this problem in the Seeker card pool itself though, and it's playing cards that directly support other players. Instead of vaporizing every enemy on the board, why not spend your actions helping your fighters find their weapons using cards like No Stone Unturned or Old Book of Lore? If your answer is, it's still more efficient for Seekers to do it themselves, well, you need to back off. Okay, some more advice. If your turns take up 75% of the investigator phase, and yes, rogues, I'm looking at you now too, speed it up a bit or lay off the combos. There's nothing more boring than watching one person play their turn for 5 to 10 minutes while your turns are something like move, fight, fight. I get that this is not really the player's fault and more of a flaw in the design of the game, but especially with higher player counts, try to tone it down a bit. You know what else is really boring? If one player in your group always relies on the same investigators, ally assets, or powerful cards. Vary it up a bit. One of the great things about this game is how many cards have been printed. There's so many unexplored possibilities out there because it's easy to just rely on the staples. But it's tiring to see them all the time, especially if they're overtuned. It makes all the different investigators feel a bit too samey. If your Seeker decks all have Magnifying Glass and Dr. Milan Christopher in them, maybe it's time to try something else for fun. And maybe if you're always playing an investigator with a 5 in one stat because you know they're great and you're generally carrying the team, maybe give a teammate a chance to play someone straightforwardly powerful while you play a bit more jank. Well, if you've listened to all of this and still feel like you really want to draw your whole deck every turn, let me introduce you to solo play. You can even do two-handed, or three-handed, or four-handed if you really want all the decks to synergize extremely well together. No need to worry about boring your pesky teammates to death. In all seriousness, there's nothing wrong with these extremely powerful strategies as long as you've talked it over with your group and everyone is okay with it. Next up is griefing, basically whenever you're intentionally weighing the team down in some way. This is pretty similar to main character syndrome since you're acting selfishly in both cases, but here the results tend to be negative. One example is when you intentionally bring an ineffective deck and you didn't clear this with your group first. Now, Mimi or suboptimal is not the same thing as ineffective. Arkham is not such a difficult game where only the most powerful thing you can bring will win a scenario. Ineffective means that you aren't able to execute your deck concept in some obvious ways. Maybe you're relying on one copy of one card in your deck with no way to help get it. Or maybe you're going against the grain in some strange way, like playing a Leo Anderson deck with no allies and you want to evade everything. Again, maybe there's some way to do it, but if your teammates weren't expecting that, then you might be griefing. And you should respect everyone's time. Getting everyone together to play a game for a few hours is not always an easy task, and then if you end up sort of tanking the scenario, it's not a very fun time. More specifically, the problem comes when you aren't contributing to the role you told everyone you could fill. In other words, if you can't kill any enemies and you said you were going to, it's just going to be a bad game for everyone. Next up is just generally playing selfishly. Instead of always taking all the resources for yourself on Crack the Case, Faustian Bargain, Deep Knowledge, etc., try asking around first. It's a nice thing to do, but again, as Carson Sinclair has taught us, getting cards or resources out of turn is extremely powerful. Your friend might need exactly one resource to put down a powerful asset a turn or two earlier than otherwise. And unless you have a good plan for the resources or cards, and you're communicating this to your teammates well, think about sharing. There's nothing more frustrating than a seeker going off by themselves, playing Crack the Case, and then having absolutely nothing to do with that money when they could have sequenced the turns differently and shared it. The same could be said for cards with skill icons. If you have extra cards in hand that you don't need, and someone else passing or failing a test will have ripple effects on the rest of the game, then make sure you're helping out the team. Have you ever told everyone to wait a few extra turns just so you could fill up your embezzled treasure or green man medallion? Slow walking the end of the game is annoying. It might even be risky. Please don't do it unless you're thinking about giving away some of that money from the embezzled treasure. Third up is playing too fast. I know that the game can go on kind of long, especially at higher player counts, but slow down and talk out your turns. And by the way, don't talk out your turns until after the Mythos phase is over. Especially in higher player counts, sequencing your turns correctly can have a large effect on the outcome of the game. Look at where all the enemies are, who's engaged with them now, and where hunter enemies might move to. If there's a lot going on the board, I usually like to ask my teammates, where should I end my turn? Since that might help with the planning. When it comes to actual skill tests, don't just grab the bag and pull. Stop and think about the test you're taking. Do you have a good chance of passing it? What are the breakpoints in the bag? What are the consequences for failing? What do the symbol tokens do if you pull them and fail? Slow down, and if you're not already beating all the negative modifiers in the bag, maybe give someone else a chance to help with the test. And unless you know what you're doing, playing recklessly generally is a bad idea. Again, it's a co-op game. Sometimes taking charge and going first isn't always the best strategic decision, but this depends on how much your team wants to share information about what's in their hand. Fourth on my list is quarterbacking, or telling everyone else what to do. There are definitely some strains of main character syndrome in here as well. Look, I know I just said that you should slow down and talk out your turns, but sometimes when this happens, one person just dominates the discussion. There's a fine line between thinking through things together and directing traffic yourself. I know the impulse, especially as a seasoned player, but you have to make sure everyone has agency when they play. Otherwise, you might as well play two-handed solo. If your group is having a problem, make sure you rotate that lead investigator token around each session and make sure that the lead investigator is listened to. If you're playing with relatively new players, it's okay to talk through some of their potential options, but let them be the one who makes the final decision. The thing is, unlike some other co-op games, because your hands are hidden, no one really has all the information. You might have a great idea how to solve the problems on the table, but maybe someone else has a better one, or is planning on saving their cards or resources for something else down the line. And you should trust the other players that they know their deck well enough to pilot it. Which leads me to my last point. Even if you are pretty sure someone else is making a less than optimal play, it's okay to let them do it. Most of the time, it doesn't matter. Maybe they could have squeezed one extra resource or card out of their turn. Now, if you're certain they're making a mistake because they forgot about an enemy in a certain location, or they're making some rules errors, or something like that, by all means intervene, but most of the time, ask yourself if it is really necessary to speak up. The last bad habit is, of course, forgetting to have fun. While for me, I enjoy Arkham for getting to think through the puzzles of the game, ultimately, it's a fun experience that you get to share with others. Unfortunately, as with many other games, players can optimize the fun out of the game. What I mean by this is that some players, given the chance, will exploit loopholes in the rules or scenarios that are supposed to make things challenging, and they instead dominate the game. This is much more of a problem in competitive games, and it requires that the designers intervene more often to revise the rules. Arkham Horror is a co-op game though, so what's the harm? Well, not everyone in your group might have the same philosophy. For you, maybe finding the exploits is the fun. And who am I to argue with that? I'm not. I'm simply pointing out that trivializing parts of scenarios might not be what everyone else signed up for. Using handcuffs in horror and high gear is really funny, but does it make winning feel more like cheating for your table? I don't know. That's something you need to clear with them. It's funny, how often do players lock themselves out of a more interesting, or dare I say fun, experience just because it's risky and doesn't have a tangible reward? This is starting to veer off into questions about scenario and campaign design, and I don't want to litter this video with spoilers, but there is a certain story choice early in the Path to Carcosa that if you know what it does, you're likely to pick it every time because it generally makes the rest of the campaign easier. But there's another part of this too. I've focused so much on this video about how you might be wrecking the experience for someone else you're playing with, but if you're not careful, you just might be optimizing the fun out of the game for you too. If all you care about is winning, then yeah, maybe you do just play the same strong deck over and over again. What's better for winning than always having practice makes perfect, or including a Cyclopean hammer? But I bet you that it will get boring, even if you are winning. You might even get burnt out from the game. You can up the difficulty level, or you can start trying out some other ideas about how to win. Try adding in some other rules, like deck building restrictions, and think about how to optimize under them. Arkham is a game that will keep being fun as long as the game can fight back, even just a little bit. Which brings me to my last bad habit. No whining. The game has a lot of randomness in it. Random card draws from the encounter deck, random card draws from your deck, and of course, random chaos tokens from the bag. Try not to live or die by the chaos token pulls. Sometimes you will get screwed, and there's nothing you could have done about it. While those lows are annoying, don't forget about the times that you passed tests that you had no business passing in desperate circumstances. Now, it wouldn't be a game if it were completely predictable, and while it's natural to express frustration when things aren't going your way that day, don't make it a habit, because no one likes playing with a whiner. That's it for today. Let me tell you, I am sometimes guilty of all of these bad habits, so please take what I said with a grain of salt. And maybe there are things that I do that are bad habits that I haven't realized annoy other players. Everyone is different, so it is hard to know what is or isn't ruining their enjoyment of the game. But what doesn't hurt is to openly talk about it every now and then. It'll make for a better experience if everyone is on the same page.